picture this. You log into your back end, make it Stripe or Shopify, whatever runs your sales, and your revenue is perfectly steady, right?
Yeah, the business is healthy. You are making money.
Exactly. You are making money, but then, you switch tabs, you open Google Analytics 4, and suddenly your conversions have just plummeted by 30, maybe 40%.
Which is an absolute nightmare scenario.
Oh, total panic.
Yeah.
You're calling your developers, you're wondering what broke over the weekend.
Yeah.
But here's the wild part. Nothing broke.
Right. It's not a bug at all.
No. It is just the terrifying new reality of web analytics in 2026. So welcome to Fix the Funnel with GA Fix. I am thrilled you're joining us for episode number 17, because today we are tackling a crisis that is basically keeping marketing and data teams awake at night across the globe.
The landscape has just fundamentally shifted. I mean, if you are still relying on the tracking playbooks from even 3 years ago, you are essentially flying blind.
Fair.
We are operating in an environment now where ad filters are currently impacting roughly 40 to 50% of users globally.
Half the internet.
Basically, yeah. And then add in Apple's Safari, right? Their intelligent tracking prevention actively caps first-party cookies to just 7 days. And Firefox, they're entirely blocking them in private browsing. The internet has basically declared war on traditional tracking.
Which perfectly sets the mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at the 2026 Guide to Cookieless Tracking in GA4. And the goal here is to figure out how you can recover that massive drop in measurement and, how to do it without violating user privacy.
Right, which is the tightrope everyone is trying to walk right now.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to define what exactly cookieless tracking is, and maybe more importantly, what it isn't. Because GA4 isn't completely cookie-free by default, right?
No, it definitely isn't. I think there's a huge misconception there. GA4 still relies heavily on first-party cookies. Specifically, that standard _GA cookie whenever a user explicitly clicks accept on your consent banner.
Right, so if they say yes, you still use cookies.
Exactly. Cookieless is really the fallback mechanism. It's the safety net for when they say no. And to understand how critical that safety net is, we just have to look at the data from the recent GA Fix scans.
Oh yeah, the numbers there are staggering.
They really are. 60% of analytics properties are losing 20 to 50% of their events strictly due to cookie dependencies.
Let's put that in human terms for a second. If 70% of your tracking relies on cookies right now, you are missing roughly 1 out of every 4 people who interact with your brand.
Yep, 1 in 4.
That is a massive blind spot. Like, if traditional tracking is like a store greeter with a clicker, counting everyone who walks through the front door.
I love that analogy.
Right. So if a cookie gets blocked, it means the greeter just dropped their clicker or went on strike.
Yeah, they just stopped counting.
But the store isn't empty. You still have customers walking the aisles, pulling items off shelves, paying at the register, which is why your Stripe dashboard still shows the revenue. But your official count in GA4 is wildly off.
That visualization captures the exact disconnect business owners are feeling right now. Cookieless tracking is basically the methodology of rebuilding that count, but doing it using transparent first-party data, event-based models, and consent mode version 2 signaling.
Okay, wait, let me stop you right there and push back on something.
Sure, go ahead.
If a user clicks reject all on my cookie banner, they are explicitly asking not to be tracked. So if I am deploying some sneaky fallback method to track them anyway, isn't cookieless just browser fingerprinting wearing a trench coat?
That is such a common fear, but no.
Are we not just finding a sneakier way to identify them?
The distinction there is crucial, and regulators are paying very close attention to it. Cookieless tracking is absolutely not browser fingerprinting.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, fingerprinting is basically the dark art of looking at a user's device, like checking their battery level, the specific fonts they have installed, their graphics card, and combining all those tiny details to create a permanent, unique shadow profile of them that tracks them across the entire internet.
Which sounds incredibly creepy.
Because it is, and that's why Google explicitly banned fingerprinting in their 2024 policy updates. If you try to use it to identify users who opted out, you risk getting your entire analytics property permanently suspended.
Wow. Okay, so if it's not building a shadow profile, what is GA4 actually collecting when someone says no?
It collects ephemeral data.
Ephemeral, meaning fleeting.
Exactly. It doesn't write a persistent file to your hard drive, and it doesn't single you out across the web. It simply acknowledges an interaction in the exact moment it happens and then forgets the individual entirely.
Okay, let's follow the journey of one of those invisible customers. They walk into our digital store, they hit reject all on the banner. How does GA4 actually salvage the data without crossing that privacy line. The deep dive mentions 4 built-in safety nets, and I really want to look at how they connect.
Sure.
It all starts with the initial signal, right? What Google calls advanced consent mode.
Right. So when that user denies consent, advanced consent mode essentially changes the language GA4 uses to communicate. Instead of dropping a tracker, GA4 sends out what we call a cookieless ping.
The cookieless ping.
Yeah, and it attaches specific GCS flags to this ping, like G100 for analytics denied or G101 for ad storage denied. It's basically telling the system, hey, I have 0 permission to store analytics data and 0 permission to store ad data.
So it's just a fleeting knock on the door to say, hey, a page view just happened from the general region of Chicago at this exact second, and then it vanishes.
That fleeting knock is the perfect way to describe it.
Because there is no client ID attached that says, this is John Smith returning for the 5th time.
Exactly. But a pile of anonymous pings isn't very useful on its own, right?
You know things are happening, but you can't see the actual user journeys.
Which leads us directly to the second safety net, behavioral modeling. This is where the machine learning steps in to connect the dots.
Oh, this is the AI part?
GA4 takes all that rich, detailed data from the users who did consent to cookies and feeds it into an AI. The AI looks for patterns in that data and then applies those patterns to the anonymous pings from the users who didn't consent.
So the AI is essentially looking at shadows. It says, okay, the people who clicked our Instagram ad and consented usually visit 3 pages before buying. I see anonymous ping from Instagram, followed by 3 anonymous page views, followed by a purchase. So I'm going to infer that was a single user journey.
You've got it. And for high traffic sites, that inference engine is incredibly powerful. It can actually recover 20 to 40% of those lost, unconsented events.
That's massive. And then the third safety net is conversion modeling, right?
Exactly. It does the exact same thing, but ties it directly to your linked accounts, like Google Ads, Search, or YouTube.
Yeah.
It mathematically backfills the missing conversions, basically, so that your ad campaigns don't look artificially terrible just because people rejected cookies.
Right, which, based on the 2026 benchmarks, can backfill 10 to 50% of denied conversions. But I see a major hurdle here, especially for smaller businesses.
The volume limitation.
Yeah. To train an AI, you need a massive data set, right? The benchmarks for behavioral modeling require a minimum of 100 events per week from consented users just to activate.
Yeah.
So if you have under 10,000 monthly users, does this machine learning just leave you out in the cold? Do you just end up staring at a bunch of useless data labeled as not set in your reports?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, unfortunately, yes, it is a harsh reality for smaller sites. Machine learning isn't magic, It is pure mathematics.
Right. Yeah.
If you don't provide the algorithm with a statistically significant baseline of consented user behavior, it can't confidently predict the unconsented behavior. And it will not guess if it thinks it might be wrong. So for lower traffic sites, you just can't rely on the AI to save you.
Which means the physical plumbing of your setup becomes your only lifeline, making sure every single cookieless ping is routed perfectly. But here's the catch with that. None of those AI fallbacks matter, and none of those anonymous pings get sent if the data never leaves the browser in the first place.
Right. If the door is locked, GA4 is completely blind.
Which brings us to the foundational plumbing. Consent mode version 2 and the actual way we store data.
Yeah, so Consent Mode version 2 became a strict legal requirement in the EU back in March 2024. You have to explicitly define parameters regarding ad user data and personalization. If you don't, Google just rejects your modeling signals entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. There is a massive, incredibly common trap that businesses fall into here with their consent management platforms.
Yeah.
The CMPs, those cookie banners we all interact with every day.
Oh, the blocking issue.
Yes. A lot of development teams configure the banner so that if a user clicks no, the CMP aggressively blocks Google Tag Manager from loading at all.
Which is a catastrophic approach to privacy compliance.
It really is. It's like cutting the main power line to your house just because you didn't want the porch light on.
That's a great way to put it.
If Google Tag Manager doesn't load, you don't just stop cookies, you stop the cookieless pings, too. You get absolutely 0 hits. And the source mentions that this specific mistake causes 40 to 60% more data loss than if you simply configured the denied state correctly.
Because the logic there stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what Google Tag Manager actually is.
Yeah.
GTM is not a tracker. It is a router.
Right.
You need the router to turn on so it can listen to the user's choice. If the user says no, GTM respects that choice and routes the anonymous ping cleanly to Google. If you block GTM at the door, the whole system completely breaks.
Okay, so assuming we haven't pulled the plug on our own router, we have to look at how we actually pass information when cookies are off the table. Let's talk about the browser's memory versus the browser's hard drive.
Okay.
The deep dive outlines a tool called the data layer. You can push real-time data, like UTM campaign parameters or transaction ID, into the data layer to attribute a sale without using a cookie.
Yep, very common practice.
But I have to ask, if I am pushing UTM campaign parameters into the data layer, aren't I technically bypassing the user's no tracking request? Like, how is that any different in the eyes of a privacy regulator?
What's fascinating here is how regulators look at the technical mechanism of persistence. There is a fundamental difference between holding something in active memory and writing it to a hard drive.
Okay, explain that.
Think of the data layer like a server at a restaurant holding a mental note of your order as they walk to the kitchen. It exists only for the exact moment the page is loading, just to pass context. Once the page loads, the thought is gone.
Oh,
A cookie, on the other hand, is like tattooing the order on your forehead, so every restaurant you visit for the next 30 days knows exactly what you like to eat.
that is a terrifying mental image, but it makes perfect sense. The transient nature is what makes it compliant.
Exactly. And passing data in that active memory can actually recover 20 to 30% of campaign attribution legitimately.
That's huge. What about session storage?
So session storage holds values just for the active tab. The moment you close the tab, the data evaporates. It is incredibly useful for remembering what a user put in a shopping cart as they navigate between different product pages. And it is entirely immune to Apple's intelligent tracking prevention because it isn't a cross-site tracker.
Got it. And then there is local storage, right? Which can hold up to 5 megabytes of data. But the source warns that the moment you use local storage to hold something like a randomized client ID, you are crossing back into territory that requires you to update your privacy notice. Transparency is always the rule.
It absolutely is. But we really have to acknowledge a broader trend here. Relying on the user's browser, whether it's cookies, local storage, or even the data layer, is becoming increasingly fragile.
Because browsers are actively deploying updates designed to block third-party scripts from executing at all.
Precisely.
Which means the ultimate solution is to pack up the operation and move it off the user's browser entirely. So let's dig into the heavy hitters of 2026. Server-side GTM and first-party user IDs.
Server-side tagging really is the paradigm shift. Instead of having the user's browser talk directly to Google Analytics or Facebook or TikTok, which is what triggers all those ad blockers, you create a server container that you own, typically hosted on Google Cloud Platform.
So you own the server.
Right. And the user's browser sends one stream of data to your server, and then your server distributes it to the marketing platforms.
The brilliance of this is in the domain name, though. You route your tracking to a custom first-party subdomain, something like analytics.yourdomain.com.
Yep.
And because the data is being sent to your own website, rather than a known third-party tracker like google-analytics.com, it actually bypasses roughly 90% of ad blockers.
Because it looks like internal traffic. It uses a server-generated client ID, hashing the user agent IP and timestamp to keep the session stable.
And we compare that server-side stability with the user ID feature.
Yes, which is highly effective. If you run a SaaS platform, a membership site, or, an e-commerce store where users log in, user ID is your most valuable asset in 2026. Instead of relying on a fragile cookie that breaks if the user switches from their laptop to their phone, you generate a secure identifier based on their actual login.
But to be clear, we aren't just sending their raw email address to Google, right? That would be a massive privacy violation.
Oh, never send raw emails. You use a cryptographic process called hashing.
Okay, so how does that work?
Think of hashing like putting a document through a mathematically perfect one-way shredder. If you feed an email, like john@example.com, into the shredder, it spits out a unique alphanumeric code, let's say X9F3K.
Okay.
If John logs in on his phone later, the shredder produces that exact same X9F3K code. So Google receives the code and connects the two devices seamlessly.
Giving you a perfect cross-device journey.
Exactly. But Google can never reverse engineer the code to find out John's name or email. It's just highly secure, non-personally identifiable information.
And the business impact of that is undeniable. I mean, properties using user ID report 40% more accurate lifetime value figures. And cross-device accuracy jumps by 30 to 50%.
It's massive.
But the GA4 AI scans show this staggering gap. 65% of login-heavy sites are missing user ID on their revenue events. They have the authenticated user sitting right there, and they're still trying to use a fragile cookie to track the sale.
It's just leaving money on the table.
So what does this all mean? Let me pause here and put on my CFO hat for a minute.
Okay, let's hear it.
You are pitching me a server-side setup. You're telling me I need to rent server space on Google Cloud for maybe $50 to $200 a month.
Yep.
And you're telling me I need to pull my developers off product features for a few weeks to build, configure, and test this custom subdomain and hashing architecture.
That's right.
Is spending thousands of dollars in dev time, plus a recurring monthly server cost, really worth it just to claw back some analytics data?
I hear that pushback constantly. And it always comes down to a misunderstanding of what that data is actually used for. Think about the cost of bad data. Let's say you spend $10,000 a month on an ad campaign.
Okay.
Because of ad blockers and cookie expiration, you are underreporting your conversions on that campaign by 30%. Your dashboard tells you the customer acquisition cost is way too high. It looks like a failure. So you turn the campaign off.
Meanwhile, that campaign was actually highly profitable. You just couldn't see the real numbers.
Precisely. You just killed your best revenue driver because your measurement was cheap. Without this first-party server infrastructure, you are flying blind on customer retention and wasting marketing spend. You are optimizing your budget based on a fraction of reality.
So the $200 a month for server hosting basically pays for itself the very first time it prevents you from making a six-figure mistake.
Legacy.
That math is hard to argue with. You just cannot optimize what you cannot accurately see. But building this powerful server-side cookieless machine brings us to the final and perhaps the most dangerous piece of the puzzle: the legal reality.
Oh, yes. Compliance?
Because there is a very pervasive myth out there right now.
Oh.
A business owner implements server-side GTM, they switch to cookieless pings, and they think, great, I'm not dropping cookies anymore. I can finally delete that annoying consent banner from my homepage.
And that is exactly how you end up in court. Cookieless absolutely does not mean consentless.
Right. Analytics data, even if it is first-party, completely cookieless, and fully anonymized, is still legally classified as non-essential data under regulations like GDPR.
Which means you still need the banner.
You still need the banner. You still need privacy notices that document exactly how you use the data layer, session storage, and those server-side IDs. And you still have to offer an easy way to opt out. Getting this wrong isn't just a slap on the wrist. GDPR fines can reach up to 20 million euros.
This raises an important question about how regulators view this stuff. The disconnect happens because technologists focus on the how, while regulators focus on the why.
Meaning?
The specific technology you use to collect the data is largely irrelevant to the law. Whether you track a user's marketing journey via an intrusive browser cookie or a sophisticated server-side hashed ID, the purpose of the collection is still marketing and analytics. It is non-essential to the functioning of the website.
Therefore, it requires consent.
Exactly. Cookieless technology doesn't bypass the law. It just ensures that when a user does consent, the data actually survives the increasingly hostile browser environment to reach your database.
Okay, so you've built the server, you've kept the consent banner, you've implemented the hashing. How do you actually know if any of this is working? How do you validate the plumbing?
You have to step outside of Google Analytics entirely to check your work. You perform a back-end comparison. Take a clean 30-day window and look at your actual back-end system. Stripe, Shopify, whatever your undeniable source of truth is for revenue. Compare those actual transactions against the conversions reported in GA4.
Right, because you are never going to hit 100% accuracy in web analytics. But the target gap you are looking for is less than 10%. Yeah.
Less than 10%. If GA4 is off by 15, 20, or 30% from your Stripe dashboard over 30 days, you have a structural data problem that modeling just cannot fix.
And you shouldn't rely purely on manual spot checks to find the leak either.
Definitely not. Automated auditing tools are essential here. The data from GA4 AI audits is incredibly telling on this point. 80% of the properties they scan have fundamental fixable errors in their base setup.
Wow, 80%.
Yeah. We are talking about tags firing twice on a single click, revenue parameters totally missing from purchase events, or consent defaults misfiring before the user even sees the banner.
Which highlights the golden rule of this entire deep dive. Modeling, AI, and server-side tools do not fix bad data foundations. They amplify them.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Right. If you have a duplicate event firing in your browser setup, moving that entire architecture to a Google Cloud server just means you are processing garbage data with incredible efficiency.
The mandate is super clear here. Before you spend weeks and thousands of dollars rebuilding your tracking architecture, spend 10 minutes auditing your current GA4 setup. Clean the foundation first.
An audit really is the only way to ensure your sophisticated cookieless setup actually delivers trustworthy insights. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. It's something that isn't explicitly spelled out in the technical guides, but it feels like the elephant in the room as we head deeper into 2026.
What's that?
Well, we talked a lot about behavioral modeling, right? And AI inferring the journeys of unconsented users.
Yeah, the machine learning filling the gaps.
Exactly. So if GA4's machine learning eventually reaches a point where it is artificially inferring up to 40 or 50% of our marketing data without direct tracking, at what point are businesses no longer managing real human behavior, but rather managing an AI's hallucination of who their customers are?
Wow. Yeah, that is a profound philosophical shift for the whole industry. We are really moving away from the era of absolute measurement and entering the era of statistical probability.
We really are. I mean, think back to that panic scenario we started with, staring at your Stripe dashboard versus your GA4 dashboard, wondering why the numbers don't match. We used to expect digital tracking to be perfectly precise.
But the reality is the exactness of the past decade was an illusion. It was completely powered by fragile cookies that user privacy laws have now rightfully dismantled.
Exactly. Today, navigating the murky waters of digital analytics requires better plumbing, smarter mathematical modeling, and an absolutely airtight audit of your foundation.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the reality of your data, and we'll catch you on the next one.